Do not blindly support the MAJ Richard Star Act. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and this may sound disloyal towards the medically retired service members, but I have some pretty serious reservations about the so-called MAJ Richard Star Act. Not the principle of what they're trying to do, but more about the way the proposed legislation is written. In fact, after reading the proposed amendments to U.S. Code, I'm not 100% sure that the people who wrote the Richard Star Act know what they're trying to accomplish. For instance, look at this VFW press release. The legislation aims to permit combat-related medically retired veterans with less than 20 years of military service to receive full earned retirement pay and disability compensation without an offset. And I know that this is just a press release, but right away, something seems off. You see, there are two programs that allow a service member to offset the so-called VA waiver. Concurrent retired and disability pay is for service members who have service-connected disabilities, and it's laid out in Section 1414 of Title 10. And then there's combat-related special compensation, and that is for combat-related disabilities. That one is tax-free, and it's laid out in Section 1413A. Now, notice that the VFW press release says combat-related medically retired veterans. It sounds like they are trying to make adjustments to CRSC, combat-related special compensation. But here's the weird thing. CRSC already pays medically retired veterans with less than 20 years. It's CRDP that doesn't pay people who are medically retired with less than 20 years. And the VFW is not alone. Even the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs says that the act would deliver combat-injured vets their full benefits. The Wounded Warrior Project, MOA, they all seem to be focused on somehow fixing CRSC instead of CRDP. Meanwhile, both the Army and the Navy clearly state that Chapter 61 medical retirees are eligible for CRSC. So right off the bat, I think that this MAJ Richard Star Act is trying to fix the wrong problem. Speaking of MAJ Richard Star, here's a little background on him. He was a combat engineer with multiple deployments, and on his last deployment, he started having trouble breathing and was coughing up blood. Doctors in Kuwait, they downplayed his symptoms and they attributed it to asthma and poor air quality. But when he got back to the States, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. MAJ Star was given a 100% disability rating, and he was medically discharged with less than 20 years. And he did not get the VA offset waiver. And just between you and me, let me say that it's some pretty slimy politics to use the name of a dead man on a law that wouldn't actually have benefited him. And the thing that really bugs me about that is it comes up twice in this situation. So anyways, I distrust this amendment because it doesn't fix the real problem that exists with CRDP and Chapter 61 retirees, but in a second, you'll see that there's more to it. The next issue is that the congressman sponsoring the Richard Star Act actually has two amendments that they're trying to get into the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act. These two amendments take different approaches to modifying U.S. code, and I guess the strategy here is just throw things at the National Defense Authorization Act and see what sticks. The problem with this is that if you or another veteran write to your congressional representative and you tell them to support the Richard Star Act, well, which amendment are they supporting? My next issue is about something that seems relatively minor, but it seriously deepens my concern that the author of this amendment doesn't really understand the law. They amend the section title for Section 1414. Now, admittedly, Section 1414, CRDP, has a notoriously awful title. Members eligible for retired pay who are also eligible for veterans disability compensation for disabilities rated 50% or higher, concurrent payment of retired pay and veterans disability compensation. You see, Congress didn't call it CRDP. That's a term that the Department of Defense and the VA came up with. But consider what the Richard Star Act would change this section title to. Members eligible for retired pay who are eligible for veterans disability compensation, concurrent receipt. It just seems odd to me that if you were going to go to the effort of changing the section title, you wouldn't change it to the term that's used to cover the entitlement. And that makes me suspicious that the author doesn't understand the difference between CRDP and CRSC. My next concern has to do with a strange and kind of ham-handed approach to the real problem that's embedded in Section 1414 of CRDP. There is a subsection B2 that specifically excludes disability retirees with less than 20 years of service from getting both retired pay and VA compensation. And that applies if their disability is merely service-connected and not combat-related. One amendment, but not both, address this, but the way they do it is by granting Chapter 61 retirees with a combat-related disability an offset and dropping all mention of medical retirees with service-connected disabilities. The amendment eliminates all mention of medical retirees with service-connected disabilities in the very section that should be helping them. And I guarantee you that this change will not produce healthy results for anybody. My final complaint has to do with the proposed phase-in of these amendments. And this goes back to my idea that if you're going to name an act after somebody, the legislation shouldn't screw them over. The way the phase-in would work is that folks with a disability rating of 40% or lower would get concurrent receipt starting in January of 2025. 80% or lower would start in 2006, and folks like MAJ Star with a 100% disability rating wouldn't get anything until 2027. I mean, not even partial consideration, and that seems pretty ignorant to me. So look, are medical retirees with less than 20 years getting mistreated? Yes. Should something be done to stop that? Yes. Will the Richard Star Act achieve that? I don't think so. In fact, I think this amendment has the potential to make things worse for a whole bunch of people. Now, I say all of this at the risk of being just sort of a Monday morning bureaucrat, because I gotta be honest, I am not particularly interested in taking on the Herculean task of attending 1,001 meetings with politicians to explain this to them. I mean, frankly, it has taken me almost a week to compile and understand the information that I've presented here. But I will say this, if you are willing to do the face work, I would be willing to sit down in a room with some wonks and hammer out the right language. In the meantime, take a look at this video to understand what really constitutes a combat-related disability.